My best friend did not just sleep with my boyfriend. She made sure that before I even knew something was being taken out of my life, I had already lost the language to name it properly. That is the part outsiders love to skip over when they hear a betrayal story. Because best friend steals boyfriend already sounds dramatic enough for a title, clear enough for people to pick a side fast, neat enough to tie up with a few cheap morals about karma, bad men, and women being jealous of each other. But what happened to me was far worse than that kind of tidy drama. Vanessa did not enter my life like a storm, and she did not lunge at Ethan with the stupid hunger of a woman who wants what belongs to someone else just for the thrill of winning. She did it like a cruel but patient gardener, pulling the small roots out of the soil first, changing the light first, shifting the position of everything first, so that by the time the tree finally fell, everyone looked at the way the branches were leaning and said maybe it had been weak from the start. For a while, she truly won. That is the part that still steals my breath whenever I remember it, not because I missed Ethan that much, but because I stood in the middle of my own life, in my own apartment, in the job I used to be good at dinner tables with people who loved me, and watched them slowly respond to another version of me being built right in front of them while no one saw the hands pulling the strings behind it. My name is Lee Morgan. I was 35 in the year Vanessa took Ethan from me. Or more accurately, the year she made him cheap enough to be taken. 36 on the night I laid the truth down in the middle of a room full of people who had believed her, and far older somewhere inside in a way no one could fully see. Because there are kinds of betrayal that do not kill you or turn you bitter all at once. They just strip away the thinnest layer of skin inside you, so that every touch afterward goes straight into the nerve. Vanessa and I met in our freshman year of college, in Boston, in a dorm hallway that smelled like ramen, floor cleaner, and cheap perfume blended together so completely you could not tell what belonged to youth, what belonged to poverty, and what belonged to all of us trying to turn into someone before we knew who we really were. Vanessa walked into my room in the second week, holding a hair dryer as if we had already known each other forever, asked to borrow an outlet because her room had a blown fuse, then stayed for more than an hour just helping me tape postcards to the wall, and telling a long story about her parents' divorce in a way that made me feel both sore. Right for her and impressed by her. Vanessa had that gift early. She knew the exact amount of honesty required to sound sincere, knew how to make you feel chosen to hear something private, and most importantly, knew how to do all of it without ever seeming like she was trying. From the outside, Vanessa was the kind of best friend every young woman thinks she is lucky to get even one of in her life. Pretty without being threatening, funny without being loud, a good listener, someone who remembered things, someone who brought you tea on the exact night you were crying because you missed home, someone who sat on the floor with you at 3 in the morning and let you talk about your mother, your father, about being afraid you were not smart enough, not beautiful enough, afraid that one day people would look closely and discover you were nothing but a pile of effort held together with a rubber band. Vanessa always said that line to me in one form or another through those early years. I only want what's best for you. She said it when I was thinking about dropping an extra class I did not need. She said it when I broke up with my first boyfriend. She said it when I cut my hair to my shoulders. She said it when I turned down a job in San Francisco to stay in New York. When we are young, we hear that sentence and think it means love. Much later, I understood that some people say, "What's best for you?" when what they really want is the right to decide which version of you makes them most comfortable. Of course, there had been signs, because every hell large enough comes with small warnings that later feel like a cruel joke. Vanessa was very good at complimenting you in a way that made you feel both lifted and cut slightly smaller without knowing where it hurt. When I wore a fitted teal dress to the end-of-semester party, she looked me up and down and smiled. You can actually pull off bold when you're not trying too hard. When a professor chose one of my essays for the student journal, she hugged me tightly and said, "See, this is what happens when you stop sabotaging yourself for a week." When a guy in the film department started pursuing me a little too obviously, Vanessa was putting on mascara and said, "He likes complicated girls. You're safe." All of it was light enough that if I reacted, I would be the one who was too sensitive. I let hundreds of little needles like that pass through my skin without naming them properly, because in return, she was always there when things were truly bad. When my grandmother died, Vanessa slept on my floor for 3 nights. When I got sick during finals, she made chicken soup so bland it was almost inedible and still forced me to finish it. When I moved to New York after college into a tiny room in Murray Hill, She was the first person who helped me put together the IKEA shelf and curse it on my behalf when the last screw stripped. That is what makes betrayals like this harder to handle than any cheap advice outsiders like to throw around. Not all of it was fake. A large part of that friendship had once been real, and precisely because it had been real, it was strong enough to hold the fake part in place inside me for far too long. I met Ethan when I was 29, at a half-work, half-social fundraising dinner in Brooklyn that I only attended because a coworker got sick at the last minute and needed someone to take her place. If I am being honest in the least flattering way, the first thing that caught my attention about Ethan was not attraction. It was stillness. He was not the kind of man who walked into a room and sucked all the oxygen out of it the way so many men do when their whole life depends on being noticed. Ethan stood near the bar, shirt sleeves rolled neatly, listening to someone speak with his whole body, head slightly tilted, not interrupting, not trying to sound smarter than he was. When we were introduced, he shook my hand just firmly enough, looked straight at me, and gave off no sense that he was already calculating what I could do for his life. At that point, I was tired of men who were too bright, too ambitious, too in love with the sound of themselves. Ethan was the kind of good guy adult women often mistake for safety. He had a decent job at a healthcare data company, answered texts on time, remembered to buy milk, seemed reliable in small things, not especially brilliant, not especially difficult, not the kind who made your pulse go wild, but the kind who made you think maybe peace was its own kind of mature desire. When I told Vanessa about Ethan after the third date, she smiled, rested her chin on her hand over a glass of wine, and said, "I actually like this one." I still remember how relieved I felt in a way that embarrasses me now. Vanessa had been the person I trusted more than my own instincts for far too many years. If she liked Ethan, then everything must have been moving in the right direction. Looking back, I feel sad for the version of myself at that time. A grown woman living alone in a big city, working, paying her own rent, taking care of her own life, and still needing her best friend's nod to feel like the man she loved had been approved, like a sensible investment. Vanessa entered my relationship with Ethan the way she entered everything in my life. Never invasive enough to be pushed out, only present enough, consistently enough, that one day you looked up and realized she had been in the middle of it all along. At first, everything seemed harmless. A weekend brunch where I invited Ethan along because Vanessa was there. A movie night in my apartment when Vanessa stopped by to return a jacket and stayed because traffic is insane anyway. A weekend trip to Hudson where Vanessa jokingly asked in the group chat if she could join, and then actually came because I need one happy weekend or I'll die. Ethan liked her almost immediately. Most people did. Vanessa made other people feel understood with the least labor possible. She asked Ethan exactly the right questions, in exactly the right tone, exactly when he started complaining about work. She laughed at the places that made him feel wittier than he really was. She said to me after one dinner when Ethan had gone down to get the car, "He's softer than he looks. You should be careful not to run over him when you get stressed." At the time, I still thought that was a kind warning. Only months later did I realize it had been the first seed. Vanessa never pushed someone out of your life with one big action. She only placed an idea of you in someone else's head that sounded perfectly reasonable. A little too intense, a little too difficult, a little too much to manage. And after that, other people did the rest by themselves. The first shifts between Ethan and me were so small that if I listed them individually, everyone would say I was overreacting. He started replying to texts more slowly, but always had an explanation. Started paying less attention when I spoke, but could always blame it on being tired. Things he said that once sounded like private jokes between the two of us slowly took on another shade I could not name in time. One night, I was telling him about how a new supervisor at the organization had quietly handed off part of a strategy I wrote to someone else, and my voice was sharper than usual because I had been furious all day. Ethan was cutting bread and said, "You don't always have to come in at a 10. On the surface, maybe he was not wrong, but something about it landed inside me strangely. It sounded as if I was no longer being heard. I was being managed. I went quiet. Ethan looked up and smiled a little. "See, this is what I mean." That was the first time I heard my own voice echoed back at me through someone else's mouth. "See, this is what I mean." Exactly like Vanessa. Whenever she wanted to turn my natural reaction into living proof of the problem she herself had been planting. Another time, after dinner with one of his friends, Ethan said in the cab home that I can be a little sharp without noticing. I asked sharp with whom. He said with everyone, then quickly added, Vanessa says you do that when you're tired. She said not to take it personally. I turned and looked at him. Streetlight slid across his face in short yellow streaks. I asked, why is Vanessa talking to you about me like that? Ethan answered, perfectly casually, she worries about you. She sees you from a different angle than I do. That was the sentence that made me cold, not because he believed Vanessa, but because he had started using her as a second lens through which to see me. No woman should have to live inside a relationship where the man she loves is looking at her through another woman's eyes. But that kind of instability grows slowly, and so cleanly that you usually do not recognize it until it is already everywhere. Then came the stage when Vanessa started seeding the kind of poison only someone very close knows how to mix. That spring my mother had to have her knee redone. I was bouncing back and forth between New York and Philadelphia trying to hold on to my job, and Ethan had entered a brutal quarter at work. I really was exhausted. There were nights I got back to the apartment, kicked my shoes off, and sat on the kitchen floor for 10 minutes because I did not have the strength to walk all the way into the living room. Once, after driving back to Brooklyn close to midnight because my mother had spiked a fever, I called Vanessa from the FDR while crying the entire time just from exhaustion. I remember exactly what I said. I feel like I'm carrying 3 lives and dropping all of them. Vanessa was quiet for a moment and then said, I know. Let me help hold some of it. At the time, I felt lucky. I did not know that from that sentence on, she had what she needed. An opening. With Ethan, she began saying little things that always came in the shape of kindness. Lee gets emotional when she's scared. Don't take the edge personally. She's had a rough season. She doesn't always know how she sounds. Just give her space when she spirals. If you push, she gets worse. To me, she said the opposite. He's just stressed. Good guys go quiet when they're overwhelmed. Don't make every distance into betrayal. I was living inside 2 currents of information without seeing the line between them. Every time Ethan pulled further away, Vanessa told me not to overthink. Every time I reacted, Ethan had already been warned in advance that I was emotional. That is how people isolate you, while still letting you think you are surrounded by love. They do not cut you off all at once. They just make every reaction of yours arrive one step behind the story that has already been told about you. Ethan began distancing himself from me in exactly the way spineless men do. Not with one clean decision, but through hundreds of little withdrawals, less checking in, less direct eye contact, easier irritation over things he would once have let slide. Once I only asked whether he was eating at the office so I would know not to cook, and Ethan snapped, "Why does everything have to feel like a trap with you lately?" I stood frozen in the kitchen with an onion still in my hand, hearing those words land as if someone had sharpened them elsewhere first. I asked, "A question is a trap now?" Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down, rubbing his face, voice tired. "You've changed, Lee?" That was an especially dangerous sentence, because someone starved for attention will almost always blame herself before she dares to name the way she is being mistreated. And that is exactly what I did. I started editing my sentences before I spoke, measuring whether I was too much. There were evenings I sat next to Ethan on the couch and felt as if I were sitting next to a man who had borrowed his body to live inside. Someone who knew Ethan's shape, Ethan's laugh, but no longer carried the same moral weight. And Vanessa was everywhere. Texts asking whether I had eaten. A small bouquet sent to my office just because. A line spoken to Ethan right in front of me, "You're good for her. She needs steady, nothing crude." But every time, she was placing me in the position of a person who needed balancing, needed managing, needed someone steadier beside her so she would not become a problem. You only understand the cruelty of that kind softness when one day you look up and realize the man you love has started treating you like a sensitive situation, not like a partner. The first almost caught moment happened at a mutual friend's birthday party in Williamsburg. On a June night so sticky with heat that the smell of perfume, beer, and skin blended into something suffocating. I went looking for Ethan because he had been gone for nearly 20 minutes, moved through a narrow hallway into the back kitchen of the rented bar space, and stopped. Ethan stood near a stainless steel counter, Vanessa leaning against one side, the two of them too close together to call it accidental. Not kissing, not obviously touching, just the distance, kind of distance you recognize immediately if you have lived inside a relationship long enough to know which piece of air someone's body reserves for whom. Vanessa looked up first, saw me, and smiled without the slightest startle. "There you are." Your man was hiding from tequila shots. Ethan turned, hesitated, then smiled. "I needed a break," I asked, perfectly evenly. "How long have you two been back here?" Vanessa shrugged. "2 minutes. Relax." The word relax dropped quickly and lightly, but it was enough to turn my question into overreaction. On the way home, I brought it up again. Ethan sighed. "You are overthinking this." That sentence, together with relax, made me go quiet. Not because I was convinced, because I was starting to feel exhausted. That is the dangerous point. People are not broken by shock alone. They are broken by exhaustion. When the real discovery came, there was no explosion, just a strange cold so deep I stood still too long before my body remembered to breathe. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was alone in the apartment. Ethan was out golfing with coworkers, and I was looking for old photos from our main trip in the iPad we used for Netflix and shared pictures. The Messages app had long stopped syncing everything, or at least I thought it had. A notification appeared the second the screen lit up. The sender's name was not Vanessa. It was something harmless, just V. The message said only, "Miss you already." Last night was worth the risk. I did not understand right away. My brain was still trying to build a version of events that was less horrifying. Then V showed 3 dots, and another message came. "She still thinks you're just overwhelmed, right?" I sat down on the edge of the couch, because my legs would no longer hold me. When I opened the full thread, what hit me was not some spontaneous affair born of two idiots slipping once. It was a line that had been laid down a long time ago. Messages between Ethan and Vanessa, broken up by obvious gaps where whole sections had been deleted. But what remained was enough. The wine nights. Vanessa told me she was spending at home because she was too tired had actually been hotel nights with Ethan after one of his conferences. Vanessa advising him she's already raw. Don't pull away too hard all at once. Ethan complaining, "I can't do another crying night." Vanessa replying, "Then stop trying to be the good guy and let her be the problem." By then the first numbness had finally given way to real pain. Not because Ethan had slept with her, but because he had sat beside me on the nights I cried over the coldness he himself had created, and then texted Vanessa afterward about how exhausting my reaction had been. But the real twist did not arrive there. It arrived over the next hour, when I stopped reading like someone who had just been cheated on, and started reading like someone finally seeing a much larger shape emerge on the screen. Vanessa had not just slept with Ethan. She had prepared that moment for a very long time. I went back through old email folders, group chats, voice notes saved in iCloud backups, even Vanessa's old texts to me that I had once read as ordinary love between women who knew each other deeply. In another thread on the iPad between Ethan and Vanessa, I found lines like, "She'll go into self-blame first. She always does. Then, if you keep calm and make it about her intensity, she'll question herself before she questions you." At one point, Ethan asked, "Do you really think she's that unstable, or are we just saying that?" Vanessa answered, "She doesn't have to be unstable. She just has to sound like too much. People fill in the rest." I sat there while my phone slipped from my hand onto the carpet, and did not even bother to pick it up. That was the moment the entire year changed shape in my head. She had not stolen Ethan in some reckless rush. She had planted doubt about me in him first, then planted doubt about me in other people, then planted it in me. And the affair was simply the organic ending to a far larger design. I had not lost Ethan because he fell in love with someone else. I had been set inside a trap where the man I loved and the woman I trusted most worked together to make me sound like the problem before I even knew I was being betrayed. I remember looking out the apartment window, the Brooklyn afternoon sinking into gray-purple, and thinking with a calm that felt almost frightening, she didn't steal him. She set me up. Then came the smear campaign. The part that if I told it too briefly, outsiders would never understand how thoroughly it grinds a person down. Vanessa was already one step ahead of me, of course. She did not let me be the first one to say what had happened. When I confronted Ethan that night, he did not deny it for long. He also was not brave enough to say it clearly. He just sat on the edge of the bed, face gray, saying, "It's not what you think, then. I didn't mean for it to happen, then. Things with us have been hard for a while." The sentences of a man who had borrowed the language of every coward before him and still thought it might work. But while I was still trying to survive the first shock, Vanessa had already begun telling her own version to other people. That I found out Ethan had been emotionally checked out and lashed out wildly. That I had been spiraling for months. That she had tried to help us, tried to help me. But in the end, she and Ethan had connected in a terrible, complicated way because both of them were exhausted from orbiting around me. It spread through our shared friend group with astonishing speed. Two women I had traveled with stopped answering texts so quickly. Another couple who had been planning to split a summer house with us sent a painfully polite message saying they wanted to keep some distance until things settle. A former coworker of Ethan's, someone who had had more than a few drinks with me himself, called to ask whether I had really been mixing wine and anxiety meds. I read every message, heard every voice, and understood a new layer of humiliation. Not only that people could believe Vanessa, but that they wanted to believe the version that made everything sound more manageable. If she was the supportive one, and I was the woman who was too much, then Ethan leaving me for her no longer looked like a filthy double betrayal. It looked like a sad but digestible story about an exhausted man, a best friend who could not resist connection, and a woman who was sympathetic but difficult to live with. Outsiders love stories that let them avoid naming evil for what it is. I became isolated faster than is bearable without feeling like you are losing your mind. That was the heaviest middle, the part no twist or sharp line can save you from in real time. I still went to work, still sat through meetings, still answered emails, still put moisturizer on my face at night, still went to the grocery store, still took out the trash, still called my mother, while another version of me ran ahead of me everywhere like a ghost with a more trustworthy voice. There were mornings I stood in front of the bathroom mirror brushing my hair, and honestly wondered whether maybe I really was the kind of person Vanessa had been quietly described. There were evenings I sat alone in the apartment that had once been mine and Ethan's, looked at his mug still on the shelf, and felt an almost unbearable shame remembering which nights I had cried to Vanessa, which sentences I had handed. And Vanessa was still texting me. Yes, exactly that, like someone too civilized to disappear completely. I hate that this is how you found out. I never wanted to hurt you. I know you probably think I'm the villain, but life got messy long before this. That language made me sicker than sex ever could, because it showed me that she did not just want Ethan. She wanted the right to define the scale of her guilt as well. I did not answer, but I did not block her immediately either. Part of me was still stuck in the stage people fall into when they have been gaslit too long, still thinking that if I stared long enough, one of her sentences might somehow reveal its flaw and save me from having to face the full dark version of who she really was. Then one day, very quietly, I stopped reacting and started collecting. Maybe because the pain had gone too far. Maybe because exhaustion had finally reached the point where I no longer had the energy to beg anyone to believe me. I bought a new hard drive, created folders, saved every screenshot from the iPad, downloaded messages, matched the timelines, cross-checked the dates. Vanessa told me she had been home with the dates she texted Ethan, that she was waiting for him in the car. Reread what she said to people, and matched it against what Ethan had texted her privately. And the more I did that, the clearer one thing became. Ethan was not the architect of any of this. He was exactly the kind of man Vanessa always targeted most easily. Someone weak-spined enough to be led while still believing he was choosing for himself. That does not erase his guilt. It only sharpens the shape of it. Once I found Ethan texting Vanessa, "I feel sick about Lee," and Vanessa replying, "You feel sick because you still want to be seen as good. That's not the same as love." Then another one, "If she melts down, don't comfort too much. It reinforces the cycle." I looked at those lines and felt both revulsion and a kind of horrified admiration for how precisely she understood human beings. A talent used so wrongly it became monstrous. She was not just smearing me to other people. She was coaching Ethan in how to respond to my feelings, so that those responses themselves would come back later as evidence against me. It was no longer an affair. It was staging. The person who helped me see the final layer was the one I least expected. Myra, Vanessa's longtime friend from high school, was not especially close to me, but close enough to come on most group trips and know how Vanessa moved in rooms. She texted me after almost 2 months of the entire group half avoiding me and wrote only, "I think there's something you should see." We met in a small bar off Cobble Hill that smelled like damp wood and bitter orange peel. Myra did not circle around anything. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. It was a thread of messages Vanessa had sent her over months, long enough that I thought I might actually stop breathing while reading it. Some of them were Vanessa talking about Ethan, saying he isn't exciting, but that's not the point. Another called him safe enough to take. There were worse ones. Lee always got to be the interesting one. Let's see how interesting she is when nobody trusts her. I looked up at Myra. She said quietly, I didn't know it was this deep at first. I thought she was venting. Then it got weird. She wanted you not just hurt. Reduced, smaller. Tessa had said some version of that. Michael too. Everything began to lock into place. Vanessa did not really love Ethan. At least not in the sense people still lie to themselves about in betrayals like this. Ethan was both tool and prize, a stable, decent enough man who had been mine. And if she could take him and make me look like the reason, then she would not just win some tired triangle. She would rewrite the emotional order of her entire life. She would become the chosen one, and I would become the woman who was too much to keep. When I understood that, instead of hurting in some new way, I felt something inside me stop shaking. Not healing. Focus. I no longer wanted a private confrontation. No more midnight phone calls. No confession from Ethan. No apology from Vanessa. I wanted the structure pulled into the open, in front of everyone who had been drinking from the same poisoned source, without ever asking who kept pouring into it. Vanessa and Ethan went public as a couple by the end of summer, in exactly the language I had predicted. Not loudly, not with a post right away, just appearing together enough times that other people could finish the story for them. Then, a month later, Vanessa hosted her 35th birthday at the rooftop of a boutique hotel in Williamsburg, the kind of place where the wind moves through strings of yellow lights, and every glass of wine looks prettier than actual life. She invited almost the entire old friend group, a few family members, some colleagues, and several people from her work network. And she invited me. The text was soft, of course. I know this is probably the last thing you want, but I don't want to keep living in a war zone. Come if you want, or don't. I just don't want there to be more ugliness. I looked at that message and almost laughed. She truly thought she had the right to call the consequences of what she had built more ugliness. But the message gave me exactly what I needed. A room. Enough people who had believed her, enough people who needed to hear. I did not have to organize anything. Vanessa had arranged the stage for me the way she always did. Only this time she did not understand who it was for. I spent the next 3 weeks finishing what I would bring to that party. Not just the affair messages. Those were too easy. I needed the full story. I needed timeline. I needed the text Vanessa sent Tessa, Mara, Michael, Susan, Ben. I needed Ethan asking Vanessa whether we were just saying she's unstable, or whether she actually believed. I needed the places Vanessa called him safe enough to take, and a man who needs admiration more than integrity. I even needed the messages where Vanessa was quietly undermining other women in the group, because a manipulator rarely only targets one person. They survive by making every person believe she is the exception. And most of all, I needed to make sure I did not look like I was walking into that room out of cheap revenge. I was not going there to scream, not to throw a glass. I was going to lay down a structure so complete, no one would be able to call it misunderstanding anymore. There were nights I sat in front of my laptop until 2 in the morning, arranging pieces, labeling evidence, printing key excerpts. My hands so cold I had to hold a mug of tea just to stop them from shaking. And there were also moments when I stopped halfway through, stared at Vanessa's name on the screen, stared at all those old "I only want what's best for you" messages from years ago, then had to stand up and wash my hands for a long time as if water could strip the disgust off my skin when I realized how deeply I had once loved someone. At Dangerous, the night of the party, early autumn still held the last warmth before New York turns cold for good. I wore a simple black dress, my hair tied low, no jewelry except the small earrings my mother gave me on my 30th birthday. I arrived 10 minutes late, just enough for the room to have found its rhythm without me. Vanessa stood near the mobile bar, the rooftop lights catching in her hair and making a soft halo around her that looked almost holy. Ethan stood beside her in a white shirt, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, in exactly the way a man does when he wants to look like he has belonged there all along. When Vanessa saw me, she smiled first. That was the thing I had waited for. No surprise, no awkwardness, just a smile. She walked toward me, kissed the air beside my cheek, and said, "I'm really glad you came." She entered that night as if she owned everything. The room, the story, the man, even the moral authority of someone mature enough to have moved beyond the past. I looked around. The old friend group, Mara, Tessa, Ben was not there, exactly as I wanted. Michael had not come. Susan was there too. A few people who did not know half the story, but were close enough to Vanessa to show up. And that, more than anything, made me strangely calm. The more people there were who did not know yet, The harder the fall would be to patch over later with family-style logic. I let the party move forward for almost an hour, long enough for Vanessa to laugh and give a short toast about friendship, second chances, and becoming who you were always meant to be. Long enough for Ethan to touch her waist a few times without realizing that hand was about to become evidence. Long enough for a few people who had been avoiding me for months to look at me with careful politeness and assume they would survive the evening without being forced to choose sides. Then the cake came out. People lifted their glasses again, and I stood up. I did not clink a glass, did not theatrically ask for attention. I simply stood, holding a water glass in my hand, and said, "Before we all keep celebrating, I want to say something, especially because for months now, there's been a version of me in this room that has had a much bigger social life than I have." The entire rooftop went silent with the kind of silence that appears when a room senses danger before it can identify its shape. Vanessa set her glass down first, very slowly. "Lee," she said, lowering her voice, "don't." I looked at her. "No, tonight you don't get to tell me what not to do." Then I opened the folder I had brought and took out the first page. I did not begin with sex. I began with concern. The message to Tessa, the message to Susan, the lines about me being fragile, too much on meds, spiraling. I read each one in the exact tone I used in work meetings. Not loud, not rushed, not crying. Then I handed my phone to Susan so she could verify her own email. Gave printouts to Mara. Let the people nearest me see them with their own eyes. Vanessa was still trying to hold her face in place. "This is private," she said. I laughed softly. "Private? You called people about my job, my mental health, my relationship. You dragged half this city into my life, and now you want to call it private?" Ethan opened his mouth. "Lee, maybe this isn't the place." I turned toward him. "No, Ethan, this is exactly the place. You both cared far too much about public perception to be corrected in private." Then I moved into the timeline. The dates Vanessa texted Tessa, the same day she called Susan, the days she told Ben I was saying things I did not remember, matching exactly the nights Ethan left the apartment claiming he had late work meetings. Then I laid the messages between Ethan and Vanessa in the middle of the group. Not all of them, just enough that no one could ever call this some messy overlap again. "She'll go into self-blame first. If you keep calm and make it about her intensity, she'll question herself before she questions you." Then Ethan asking, "Do you really think she's that unstable, or are we just saying that?" Vanessa answering, "She doesn't have to be unstable. She just has to sound like too much." People fill in the rest. The entire group went dead still. I could hear the wind threading through the string lights, the ice shifting slightly in the wine bucket, the careful way someone at the far table set a glass down. Vanessa said, still trying to sound soft, "You're taking things out of context." I nodded. "Good, let's do context." Then I pulled out Myra's thread, the one where Vanessa called Ethan, safe enough to take, and wrote, "If they all keep treating Lee like she's the bright, shiny one, she'll never stop sucking the air out of every room." Ethan visibly jerked and turned toward Vanessa, as if seeing her for the first time. "What is that?" he asked. Vanessa answered immediately, "It was venting." I looked at her. "No, it was architecture." Then I said the line I had been living with in my head for too long. "You didn't take him. You rewrote me." That was when Vanessa's most beautiful mask finally cracked. Not in the form of screaming. She was too skilled for that. She cracked by dropping softness altogether. Her face sharpened, her eyes darkened. The corners of her mouth hardened in a way that made everyone who had ever believed she was just warm and maybe slightly overconcerned visibly flinch. "Oh, please," she said, and for the first time her voice no longer tried to soothe anyone. "You want the truth. Fine. You always needed an audience for your pain. You always needed everything bigger, louder, brighter. I didn't rewrite you. I translated you for people who were tired of pretending not to notice." A few people sucked in breath quietly, not because they believed her, but because she had finally moved too close to the ugly truth at the center of herself. I looked at her and saw, more clearly than ever, how long exhaustion and envy had been living beneath her skin. "No," I said. "You needed me smaller." "Different thing?" Ethan asked again, this time with his voice pitched higher, the thin calm he had been clinging to finally gone. "Safe enough to take." "What the hell does that mean?" Vanessa whipped toward him. "Don't do this here." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Here, you said this about me." And I could see the exact moment Ethan understood what he should have understood much sooner. That he was not Vanessa's great victory. He was both tool and proof. A man decent enough on the surface that Vanessa taking him would carry symbolic weight far beyond him as a person. Vanessa looked at him. then around at the room growing quieter and more torn by the second, and did what manipulators always do when the exits are closing. She tried to reclaim victimhood. "I was hurt too," she said, eyes beginning to redden. "No one here understands what it's like to spend your whole life doing everything right and still be invisible. And if you ask me what the coldest thing about that night was, it was not that she said it. It was that some part of me really did understand. And because I understood, I could never forgive her. There are wounds that, if faced honestly, a decent person would never let spread into a weapon. Vanessa did. The room unraveled after that, in a way that was not beautiful. No one denounced her in chorus. No one stood and applauded me. Real life does not work that way. Susan avoided my eyes. One old couple from the group made a too hasty exit. Tessa sat frozen, pale, and refused to look away. Myra was the first to say something out loud. "You did this to all of us, didn't you?" That question was not just for me. It was for the dirty little network Vanessa had spun around everyone, where each person had been given just enough of a tailored version to feel like the one who truly understood. Ethan stood fully now, actually stepping back half a pace as if physical distance might help his mind catch up. "Did you ever even love me?" he asked. Vanessa looked at him with an expression that made me shiver, not because it was cruel, but because it was tired. "I chose you," she said. "That should have been enough." And that was the moment everyone in that room understood the truth I had been living with far too long. Vanessa did not love in any healthy sense. She chose, she arranged, she held. She shrank other people until they fit the space inside her. Love for her had never been about meeting another person. It was about controlling what version of that person she had to stand beside in order to stop feeling small herself. I did not stay to watch the whole collapse. I had not done all of that in order to enjoy the fall. I did it because I could no longer bear letting a false story remain untouched. Once I set the folder down and reached for my coat, Vanessa looked at me one last time with something between hatred and sudden vertigo. "You think this means you win?" she said. I looked at her, then at Ethan, then at the faces all around us, embarrassed and exhausted, and answered honestly, "No, it just means you don't get to keep my face attached to your lie anymore." Then I walked away. The wind up on the rooftop was colder than I expected. The elevator ride down to the lobby took less than a minute, but it felt like a year. I looked at my reflection in the steel doors, mascara intact, shoulders not shaking, and that was what frightened me more than tears would have. I was not falling apart. I was empty. There are victories that arrive only after you have already gone too far inside the pain to receive them as gifts. Karma did not come like lightning. It came slowly, seeped in, and came in the exact form that punishes people who build their lives out of image. In the first 3 months after the party, Vanessa did not lose everything at once. She lost it gradually. That is the part that hurts. The people who had always texted her first grew slower and fewer. Some of the women in the group, after seeing how she had used my private pain, began revisiting the things she had once said about them. It turned out I was not the only one she had ever translated. One woman discovered Vanessa had been telling people she drank too much at networking events. Another heard that her husband was supposedly emotionally unavailable, according to Vanessa's gentle advice. The little needles everyone once believed were happening only to them began threading onto the same string. That was when Vanessa's image truly tore, not because of the affair, but because of the pattern. Ethan stayed with her longer than I expected, maybe out of shame, maybe because when a man has wrecked his life to be with someone, he often tries desperately to keep calling it love for a while so he does not have to look straight at how cheap his own choices were. But Vanessa did not know how to live inside something that no longer served her narrative. A man who had once been stolen. To prove something becomes heavy very quickly once that victory is stripped of its meaning. I heard through Mara that Ethan started drinking more, took some time off work, then found out Vanessa had been messaging one of his old coworkers in exactly the tone she had once used with him. Not a full-blown affair, just enough to reveal the pattern. She could not bear existing without some parallel line running somewhere that made her feel powerful. Ethan moved out before Christmas. No one in the group staged some great consolation for him. That is punishment in the adult world. Not loud, just silence where there used to be chairs waiting for you. Vanessa lost the man, lost the network, and then lost the one thing she had always treated as her real asset, the image of herself as the woman everyone felt safe giving their secrets to. I heard referrals for her personal branding consultancy dropped hard. No one wants to hire a person who has just been exposed for turning other people's lives into material for correcting her own status. But that is not the part that still chills me most. The coldest part is that in the months after, I still missed her sometimes in the way you miss a place that once felt like home. Not because I wanted to go back, but because there were mornings I made coffee and suddenly remembered Vanessa's hand holding a mug of tea out to me when I was 20. Or some song playing in a grocery store would throw me back into a road trip where we sang the words wrong until our throats hurt. And in that exact same instant, my brain would flash the text she sent Tess. Saw Susan, Ethan. That is something almost no one tells you about betrayal. Bad memories do not always erase the good ones. They just lie on top of each other, and you have to live with both at once. Like a kind of lingering toxin that no longer knocks you down, but still changes the color of your blood. Ethan called me twice in the following year. The first time, I did not answer. The second time, nearly a year after the party, I listened. His voice was thinner, more tired. The voice of a man finally living inside the consequences he once imagined he could avoid through belated decency. He said he was not calling to ask me back. I believed him, not because he was noble, because he no longer had the face to dream that far. After the broken apologies, after long pauses, he finally said one sentence. I didn't realize she was teaching me how to look at you. That line made me sit still for a long time, not because it redeemed anything, but because it was the closest he had ever come to the truth. No, I said. She was, but you let her? On the other end, Ethan was silent so long I could hear the hum of his air conditioner. Then he said, I know. I hung up after that, not angry, not relieved, only clearer about something I probably knew already. Being manipulated and willingly benefiting from manipulation often live side by side much longer than people want to admit. Ethan was not an innocent victim of Vanessa. He was a weak-spined man, easily used by a woman like her, and selfish enough to stay inside that use as long as it benefited him a little longer. If anyone asks whether Vanessa, losing everything, gave me satisfaction, I always say no, not in the way people want. Yes, she lost Ethan, lost friends, lost credibility, lost the right to tell stories about other people in a voice everyone trusted. But I do not believe in the kind of justice where another person falls, and you automatically stand upright again exactly as you were. I did not stand up exactly as I was. I went on, of course. A year later, I moved to a different job, left the old organization quietly, and moved into another apartment in Cobble Hill with windows facing an old maple tree and a kitchen smaller but calmer than the last one. I stopped sharing devices with any man ever. I stopped telling unfinished wounds to anyone just because they asked in a soft voice. I still had friends, still laughed, still went out to dinner, still had evenings so easy I almost believed the cold place in my chest was gone. And then some nights someone would say, I only want what's best for you, or we're just worried about you, or don't take it personally, she means well. And my whole body would go rigid like an animal that remembers the sound of the gun. So no, I did not feel cleanly healed by watching Vanessa lose the things she had once built out of me. I only watched truth do its work, slowly, heavily, and without negotiation. If I had to compress this story into one sentence for people who like neat conclusions, I could say this. Vanessa thought she had won when she got Ethan, and made me look like the woman who could not hold on to him, because I was simply too much. But in the end, all she really got was a man who knows how to betray, and a life built on lies so thin that the right light tore right through them. And I, the one who for a while really did lose a job, lose friends, lose a relationship, lose my voice, and nearly lose trust in my own memory, did not get a beautiful ending. I only got something harder, the truth. Not truth as light and salvation. Truth as cold concrete under your feet. It does not hold you. It does not warm you. It does not return the part of you that used to be soft. It is only hard enough that the next time someone tries to rewrite you in a gentle voice, you hear the sound of the pen touching paper from the very first stroke. And sometimes, after a betrayal like this, surviving with the ability to hear that first stroke may be the closest thing to victory you ever get.